Today is part 2 of my Jon Snow fan art, where I'm going to show you how to draw skin in colored pencil. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. I have decided to break this up into 2 additional videos. We already had last week where we focused on the hair. A card will pop up here so you can check that out if you missed it. This week we are going to focus just on his face, and next week on the leather and fur of his clothing. That way I don't have to speed today's video up too much by trying to fit it all into one. Plus, as you can see, I'm not done. All of the supplies that I am using for this are listed below in the video description. If you're a supporter over on Patreon, the 2-hour version of this tutorial is available for you now, complete with voiceover, and I've got a lot of real-time clips mixed into that video. Now we'll move on to this tutorial. I am starting with light flesh from Polychromos for my base layer on the skin, and I'm going to go ahead and put this color over everything. Now, I did use nearly 50 colors on the skin between the eyes, the skin itself, and his beard and eyebrows, that sort of thing, all the shadows. That's a lot of colors. I will list out the main ones that I used for the skin, but if you don't have the same colors as me, it is not a big deal. Worry about your values. Make sure your darks are dark enough and your lights are light enough. And use a lot of pencils. Don't just grab 2 and think you're going to get all of the skin done with 2 different colors. So here I've come on top with a sort of golden brown color, and then I'm going over that with my cinnamon. You can see I'm leaving the center of the forehead fairly light. I'm just starting to block in where my lights and darks go. I'm using a sepia color on that edge because I'm going to need the edge of his face or his head to really fade out into the hair here. I'm going to blend that out with the Mona Lisa Odorless Paint Thinner. I'm using a fair amount on my brush here, and you can see it's darkening up the paper. As that dries, it's going to lighten right back up. You can see this looks pretty terrible at this stage. It's okay. I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to add my additional layers on top. And I will start drawing in some of the wrinkles on the forehead. Be careful with this because he's not very old. We don't want these wrinkles to be too deep, so you don't want to go very dark on that. I'm going right over everything with my light flesh again, and using that caput mortuum. That is a color that I will pretty much use on every skin tone. I love that pencil. But I'm going over that with a lot of the shadows. Starting to pay attention to where my lights and darks are. I'm using a sepia color for the darkest portions here. I'll also come back through with, I want to say it's called Cassel Earth or Cassel Brown, I forget which, but it's by Luminance. I'll use that quite a bit for the really dark portions. I've even used a little bit of black just on the border between the side of his head and his hair because that really needs to be shadowed. I'm going to blend all of that out with the Mona Lisa Odorless Paint Thinner. Now, I need to make sure that I go way darker than I think I need to go in order for this technique to work. So you can see I'm going super, super dark here. I'm using an olive green from Polychromos. I want to say that's olive green yellowish, along with some of the sepia colors. Really darkening everything up, which will make sense in a second. Let that dry, and now I'm going over all of this with my white Luminance. You want to use a white Prismacolor, could do something similar. It's not as good, but you could if you have that. I'm taking this color over it. When I blend that out with the paint thinner, I'm not going to use as much paint thinner on my brush now, but look at how it pulls all of my lights and darks together. If I did not go too dark on the first layer intentionally, then this would just be white. It wouldn't come out looking right. I wouldn't have any form here. So I'm going to blend that out. I'm going to let it dry. And then I'm going to go over it with more of my darker colors. And here I am using, I believe that is burnt sienna 50%. It's Luminance. It's very similar to the caput mortuum color by Polychromos, but it's a little bit more opaque. You can see I'm taking that light flesh and fading that into this color. Now, the thing to notice here with the skin isn't so much the actual colors that I'm using. Look how it fades from one color to the next. I don't just start with brown and put it up against the light colors. And I think that's where a lot of people have a problem where the skin looks very dirty, is that they'll do their light flesh color or a light color, and then they just do all of their shading with the brown, and it doesn't look right. It ends up looking very dirty, very muddy. Here, where I've got the dark brown, it fades from dark brown into the caput mortuum, into this kind of golden color, and then into my light flesh and white. It fades from one to the next. After that dried, I went ahead and put more white over that. I'm going to blend this out. Now look how smooth and soft I'm able to get the skin in doing this. And I'm doing all of this in very light layers. So I can keep layering a lot without damaging the tooth of my paper. If I was burnishing where I was pushing very hard to blend, then I wouldn't be able to layer on top and I wouldn't end up with the look that I'm going for here. So here you can see I'm using this sort of golden color, pulling some of the skin tones out. I'm really paying attention to my reference photo, noticing where the lights and darks need to go. For these final layers, as I get towards the end of all of the skin, I don't need as much paint thinner on my brush. If I had too much, I'm just going to lift all of that pencil off the paper and end up with a bunch of paintbrush strokes, which is not what I want. So I barely have any paint thinner on that brush, just a tiny bit to smudge everything out. I can have a lot more for the earlier layers. Now I've got a very sharp pencil and I'm pulling some of the hair back over the forehead now that I've got the majority of the skin blocked in. You can see where I've got some of the skin. It has to look like you're seeing some of his scalp through the hair. So that's where now I come back on top with the individual strands and pull that over the skin. I want to make sure this wrinkle on his head is very subtle. Do not go dark on that. I'm also using the Derwent Drawing Chinese White quite a bit for the white areas. That's a really nice opaque white pencil. I don't like it for fine detail because it's too large and very soft, but it is amazing for larger areas. Definitely one of my must-have pencils. Again, paying attention to where those lights and darks are on that reference photo. And as long as I don't push too hard, I can keep coming back and layering more color as needed. And that wrinkle is way too dark in the center. I'm going to come back through with a bit of an eraser. I will use my Faber-Castell ink eraser, that's the green one you see there, and lift some of that off because it was definitely too dark, which made that wrinkle too deep. So I had to soften that out. You can see I'm darkening up the edge of his forehead quite a bit. I want to make sure that he has a more three-dimensional look. So now moving on to the eyes. I'm going to do a separate video where I slow this way down and just focus on eyes, but for now we'll move through it fairly quickly. I'm going to do the skin exactly how I did the forehead, where I lay down the light flesh and then build up my shadows and blend out, then put the white over it. Notice for the whites of the eye, the biggest tip I can give you, they're not white. It is gray. Do not make the whites of your eyes in your portraits solid white. It looks wrong. The only thing that ends up being really, really white is the white highlight. On the eyebrows, look at those at the shape of that. I really want to pay attention to the reference photo. I don't want to just put random hairs all over and have this giant caterpillar on his face. That won't look right. I've got to make sure that portions of the skin are showing through. Also notice that the white of the eye does not extend from one corner to the other. It's broken up by this sort of pinkish color. Look closely at your eye in the mirror. Look at how much pink is actually in those corners. And on that eyebrow, look at how I've got really dark areas and really light areas. I'm not just using one color. I do have some black, but I've also got grays and browns in there as well. For the eyelashes, don't go crazy. That's an easy place to get really excited and think, I know how to do eyelashes, and you put a million of them in there, and there really should just be a few. Be very careful with that. Do not want to do too many. So on to the second eye. It is just the same thing that I did on the previous eye, where I started very light, just kept building up my shadows, making it darker, adding the white on top, blending it out, and repeating that process until I get them dark enough. And even here, before I move on to the cheeks, it still won't be dark enough. I'm going to come back through after and really better define my shadows. I will also be coming back through and drawing or painting in some white detail with the titanium, the titanium white and the touch-up texture from brushandpencil.com, and I'll have a link in the video description below to those two products that I'm using. But I mix those two, and then I can paint white highlights over my work, and it's meant for colored pencils, so it's archival and totally safe, and I love that stuff. So I'll have a link for that if you're interested. Onto the cheeks. This is the same thing that I did on the forehead. I'm just paying attention to where my lights and my darks go. There's obviously a bit more form here, but I'm going to go through this more quickly because this is the same thing, where I start with a light flesh, build up my other colors, add white over everything, blend that out, and just keep layering that way. And it will go through some really creepy layers where it, like, that one's not good. But you can see you go through some scary layers. As long as you're not pushing too hard with your pencils, you can keep layering until you get it to look how you want it to. Now notice these shadows. I've got to get them a lot darker. And the nose is not just outlined. Don't outline your nose. There are always going to be shadows, not heavy, harsh lines. So I'm going to let that set for right now. And it's a little scary looking, and as that white dried from the paint thinner, you can see it got really pasty. I will definitely go over that with more color. But I'm going to start on the bottom portion. And this was one of the scariest looking parts to me. It looked terrible. But look at how I have to go underneath where the beard is going to go. And I've even got my lips a little bit darker than I need to go, because I'm going to do the same thing where I go over them with white. If I don't have them dark enough to start with, then when I go over them with the white, they're going to be too pale. But he looks really scary right now, like vampire Jon Snow. I'm just going to keep layering these colors more and more. But again, because I'm working with a light hand, I can layer as much as I want. So I'm blending that out. And here, again, I don't need much paint thinner on my brush. The first layers, yes, but the later layers, I do not want much paint thinner there. So going back through and really defining some of these shadows and highlights. And this is one of those things, watch your reference photo. Don't just assume you know where the shadows go, because if you make the cheek too rounded or anything like that, you can really completely change the shape of that person's face and make them not look like them anymore. Pay attention to that. So onto the hair, notice that these aren't just all going the same direction. They're going all over the place. I don't have to copy the reference photo exactly, but I need to get a general feel. I need it to look very similar. So while each individual hair isn't exact, I need to make sure that I've got them curving and overlapping the same way that his actually do. You can see I blended out some of the area on the side of the face, the other side, with a paint thinner over that, or over those hairs. And it darkened everything up, which is what I need so that I can go back over it with more dark colors. But if you were working on an area that you needed to stay light, if more of his skin needed to show through, then you don't have to blend out with the paint thinner. Don't feel like everything you do needs paint thinner over it. Not everything does. And I start with the hair. I'm starting with a brown color. I want to say that's the walnut color by Polychromos. My pencil is very sharp, but I start with that brown. I also pull some grays in there and then come through with the black. Notice how the black is mostly on the underside of the jaw and then fades out into the hair. Don't make your hair, the beard or eyebrows, it's the same as the hair on his head. Do not make them all one color. It will not look right. Pay attention to where you need light and dark areas. And don't do a few strokes for the beard and think, oh, this looks awesome. I understand how to do hair, and make it all look the same. Watch your reference photo. Now for the lips, notice how light those have gotten. I really need to make sure that they're not that much darker from his regular skin tone. Otherwise, he's going to look like he's wearing lipstick, which definitely does not fit this character. So here's where I'm using the brush with the touch-up texture and the titanium white powder from brushandpencil.com. You can see how I can just get this tiny, tiny little detail. It's going to dry a little bit softer than that. It won't be quite this opaque, but if I want it more opaque, I can just put another layer over it. I'm even adding a few details with hair where the light is catching some of the strands from his beard. This little detail, I just love how this works. I love that product so, so much. All these little lines. Don't want to go too crazy with it. And that's one thing with a product like this. You'll do a few brush strokes and think, wow, this looks great on the hair. It looks great on the beard. And you may go overboard with it. Do a little bit, back away, look at your art, and come back and decide if it needs more. Do a little bit more, back away and look at it, and just keep doing that until you can get it to where it looks exactly how you want. Now, the nice thing with that product is if you go too dark, you can take your colored pencil and go right back over it. It's really not a big deal. But here is the finished face. Next week, we will be looking at the leather and fur of his clothing. But this video was already getting very long and I didn't want to speed it up anymore, so I decided to separate this into a 3-part video. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Again, if you're supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where the 2-hour version of this tutorial is available for you now. If you're new to my channel, I have new video critiques every Tuesday where I'm critiquing your original paintings or drawings, my own speed paintings, drawings, and tutorials every Wednesday, art Q&A videos every Thursday, and artist vlogs each weekend. So if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. And you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+. All of those social media sites are linked below in the video description where you can keep up with news, my newest work, and see real-time clips of whatever it is I'm currently working on. I'll see you guys tomorrow. My mom always asks what I'm working on, and I send her a photo of it, and she's happy and praises me because my mom is one of those moms who thinks everything I do is perfect. Best mom ever. When I sent her this picture, she had to show me up. Art clearly runs in my family.